The room is thick with tension as the cameras flash and a polished man in a navy suit sneers from behind the podium, his voice booming with theatrical certainty. Ladies and gentlemen, let us not be swayed by conspiracy theorists and low-level technicians. The moon landing was a victory of American excellence, engineered by the brightest white minds of NASA, and there were no secrets, none that matter. His words ripple through the press room like a slap, and all eyes shift to the back where a lone figure stands motionless. Hands weathered by time, face a calm but stern eyes, carrying the storm of 6 decades. Elijah Merrick, a black man in his late 70s, short in stature but impossibly composed, wearing a worn gray sweater over an ironed white shirt with thick-rimmed glasses and a quiet dignity that commands more attention than the smug politician ever could. Elijah doesn't flinch. He steps forward slowly, the silence swelling with every shuffle of his faded brown shoes against the cold marble floor. Reporters murmur, recognizing his name from the invitation, though few understand its weight. Elijah was a low-ranking electrical engineer on the Apollo 11 mission, relegated to night shifts and janitorial supervision in public. Though in private, he was one of the few who designed the emergency backup systems that saved the lunar module during re-entry, a fact never credited to him. But this story begins much earlier in the boiling heat of 1960s Alabama, where Elijah grew up the son of a sharecropper reading physics textbooks salvaged from white schools' trash bins, teaching himself trigonometry under gas lamps, and outscoring every white applicant on NASA's engineering exam, only to be assigned as a support technician, a title meant to keep him in the basement, both figuratively and literally. He speaks now with a calm voice that pierces the air like a blade. My name is Elijah Merrick. I was there. I know what really happened. The room shifts, reporters leaning forward, cameras swiveling, and the man behind the podium, the new chairman of the NASA Historical Board, Richard Gibbons, a corporate-backed authority with a smooth tongue and a reputation for revisionist spin, laughs dismissively. "Sir," he says, oozing condescension with all due respect, "we appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a scientific forum. We don't traffic in urban legends or unfounded speculation." Elijah does not blink. "I'm not here for appreciation. I'm here for truth." There's a pause, a hush, a flicker of something in Richard's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. Elijah continues, his voice steadier, now sharper, recounting the night before the launch when a fault was discovered in the descent stage. Guidance backup, a failure that would have meant certain death for Armstrong. And Aldrin had the primary system failed, which it nearly did. Elijah was summoned by one of the senior engineers, not to fix it, but to explain why the math didn't work. Assuming the fault was his, what he did instead was rewrite the logic gates by hand on a chalkboard while a room full of white men stared in reluctant awe. But they made him sign a waiver. For the sake of mission unity, they said, the world needs a clean narrative. And so Elijah disappeared from history, assigned to vacuum rooms and answer phones while his work made global headlines under another name. As he speaks, reporters begin searching their notes, whispering. Some remember the rumors, the inconsistencies in the data logs, the anomalies in the archival memos. One brave journalist asks, "Do you have proof?" Elijah nods slowly, pulling from his satchel a faded folder, edges curled, stamped confidential in red. He holds it aloft. "This is my design. The schematic for the secondary power switch that prevented the system from overheating. The man who got credit for it, Dr. Bryce Allen wasn't even in the building that night. The room explodes, questions, flashes. The furious voice of Gibbons shouting, "This is outrageous, security escort." This man out, but it's too late. The spell is broken. Eyes no longer believe the suit behind the podium. They see Elijah. They see the quiet fury in his hands, the years of silenced genius, the humility of a man who once held the future of humanity in his palms and gave it freely while being spit on by the very country he served. As security approaches, a second voice cuts through the chaos. It belongs to an elderly woman near the front. White hair pulled tight. Her badge reading Retired Flight Control. She rises. He's telling the truth. She says, "I saw it. I was there. We all knew. We just weren't allowed to say." And suddenly others rise, too older. Grayer men and women who once walked NASA's halls in silence. Engineers, secretaries, interns, each one stepping forward with a piece of the same puzzle. Richard Gibbons stares in horror, realizing the narrative is slipping. The dam is bursting. The myth of a sanitized, all-white heroism is crumbling under the weight of the real story. A story of sacrifice, silence, and buried brilliance. Elijah doesn't smile. He doesn't grandstand. He simply sets the folder on the table and says, "I never wanted credit. I wanted honesty. I wanted kids who looked like me to know they weren't crazy to dream of the stars." A hush follows. It's heavier than before, deeper reverent. Later that night, a clip of the confrontation goes viral. Viewed by millions in hours, social media explodes with the hashtag Elijah was. Their schools begin requesting his designs. Historians demand full audits of NASA's archives, and a bronze statue is commissioned not of Armstrong's boot, but of a chalkboard with Elijah's schematic standing tall outside the Kennedy Space Center. But Elijah does not attend the unveiling. He is busy visiting schools, handing out star charts, telling black and brown children in the poorest neighborhoods. The sky does not belong to anyone, not even NASA. It belongs to those brave enough to claim it. And in the quiet of his small living room, he watches a new generation of dreamers look up, no longer seeing shadows in the stars, but reflections of themselves. Because, in the end, this was never about the moon. It was about the truth, and sometimes the truth wears. An old sweater walks with a slow gait and carries history in a satchel. No one thought to search until it was far too late to silence it. But the truth, once freed, does not rest. It moves like fire through corridors long kept shut. In the days that follow Elijah's revelation, journalists dig deeper, and what they find is more than one buried name. They uncover a pattern, a deliberate effort to keep people of color, women, and anyone outside the white elite out of the spotlight. Names begin to surface. Leona Hughes, a brilliant black mathematician whose calculations corrected the lunar velocity estimates. Mateo Alvarez, a Mexican technician who caught a last-minute electrical fault, but whose report was attributed to his supervisor. Clara Okafor, a Nigerian-born software coder whose work was erased after she left. Each story is a spark. Together, they ignite a reckoning. Gibbons, desperate to regain control, calls for a press conference. He stands before the world again, his voice no longer smug, but defensive. There were policies in place, yes, but these were different times. There was no ill intent, he insists. But before he can finish, a large screen behind him flickers to life. It's a video feed, Elijah seated before a humble backdrop. Not a polished studio, but his modest kitchen sunlight slanting across a table covered in open notebooks. Ill intent, Elijah says softly into the microphone, is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles, but it always erases. The world watches, breath held, as Elijah tells the story no textbook ever dared to print, how he was offered hush money to stay silent, how he saw white interns promoted while senior black engineers were dismissed for speaking up, how he once found his own report in the trash with another name typed over it. I was told the world wasn't ready for people like me to be heroes, he says, his voice cracking slightly. But I think you all are ready now. The crowd erupts, not with anger, but with applause, slow and rising like thunder over mountains. The next morning, Elijah's front lawn is blanketed with letters, handwritten notes from teachers, students, astronauts, even children from as far as Kenya and Vietnam. Thanking him, a boy in a wheelchair writes, I thought heroes had to look a certain way. You showed me I was wrong. NASA, under immense public pressure, convenes an emergency ethics board. For the first time in its history, it issues an official apology, not just to Elijah but to every forgotten contributor, promising a full historical audit, new scholarships, and a restructuring of their diversity programs to give voice to those long denied it. But Elijah doesn't bask in victory. He sits with it quietly, feeling its weight. In his heart there's joy. Yes, but also sorrow for the decades lost, for the names who never lived to hear their truth spoken. At night he gazes up at the moon, that silent sentinel that once carried his unseen work into the heavens, and whispers, We made it, didn't we? And in the hush of the universe, it feels like the moon whispers back. One day, a young black girl named Amara knocks on his door, clutching a worn copy of Physics for Beginners. Her eyes are wide, nervous. Mr. Merrick, she says, will you help me get to space? Elijah smiles, slow, knowing proud, and steps aside to let her in, because justice is not a moment, it's a legacy. And finally, the stars are beginning to make room for every voice once silenced, every hand once unseen. The sky at last belongs to all of us. And so the quiet legacy Elijah had carried alone for decades begins to bloom not in headlines or statues, but in the fire of young minds lit by truth. Each day, more students arrive. Black, Latino, Asian native, poor, white kids from mining towns. Girls with calloused hands, children of refugees, all finding their way to Elijah's porch, with trembling voices and star charts folded in their backpacks. He opens the door each time without hesitation, always in the same gray sweater, the same clear, unwavering eyes. He teaches them not just formulas and vectors, but resilience. He tells them how silence can be a weapon or a shield, and how their names must be carved, not written in pencil. He forms a small group, informal but passionate, called the Second Engineers, named for those whose work built the backbone of history yet were never seen. The group begins live streaming free STEM workshops from Elijah's living room, and within weeks they're viral. What starts as a single folding table and a chalkboard becomes a movement. Donations pour in not from corporations but from janitors, teachers, nurses, single mothers. One message attached to a $2 donation reads, This is for the man who told my grandson he matters. Elijah remains humble, but the world will not let him hide again. Invitations flood in Harvard, MIT, even the United Nations, but Elijah declines them all. He says, if the sky is for everyone, then we must start from the ground. And the ground is here. But the most unexpected invitation comes not from academia, but from NASA itself. A new administrator, a young black woman named Dr. Layla Freeman, barely 40, and the first of her kind to lead the agency, visits him in person. She kneels beside his chair and says, "Mr. Merrick, we'd like to name the new lunar module after you." Elijah stares at her stunned. "You want to name a rocket after a janitor." She smiles. "No, sir. After the engineer who saved Apollo 11 and taught the world that dignity can't be buried forever, the announcement breaks every social media metric. The Merrick lander becomes a symbol not just of space travel but of the reckoning. America still faces. The lander is engraved with a single line by Elijah's request. Truth has gravity years pass. Elijah grows slower. His steps measured, his hands shakier, but his voice when he speaks still carries like thunder wrapped in silk. He lives to see Amara, once a shy girl on his doorstep, earn a full ride to Caltech, then MIT, then become the lead engineer on the Merrick lander. The day it launches, millions watch live. Elijah watches too, his hand trembling slightly on the remote. A single tear tracing the line of his weathered cheek as the rocket lifts into the skyfire, and brilliance and justice all roaring at once. As the module disappears into the atmosphere, Elijah whispers, "Fly higher than I ever could." That night he passes in his sleep, peaceful, surrounded by photographs of children, sketches, letters, a folded flag, and the original schematic he once saved in silence. His funeral is held in the largest auditorium in Huntsville. Thousands attend. But what matters more are the silent vigils held in classrooms across the world, where kids sit under cardboard stars listening to the story of the man who went unheard, then became a voice for millions. His life proves something vital, something carved deep into history, now that no truth, no matter how buried, stays buried forever. Because dignity does not fade. It waits, and when it rises, it does not come alone. It brings a future brighter than the stars he once reached for. But even in death, Elijah Merrick's voice refuses to be silenced. 1 week after his passing, something extraordinary happens. Amara, now 29, pauses mid-interview on international television when asked who inspired her the most. She doesn't speak. At first, she simply reaches into her coat pocket and pulls out a faded, folded page. Elijah's original hand-drawn schematic of the lunar module's emergency power system. "This," she says, her voice quivering with reverence, "was drawn on a chalkboard by a man who was never meant to be remembered. But he remembered all of us. He built systems that worked not just in machines, but in people. He gave us power, real power." The interview goes viral, but more than that, it sparks a movement. Across the world, students begin creating what they call Merrick walls, public chalkboards in schools, libraries, community centers, where anyone can write the name of someone overlooked, someone erased, someone who mattered but was never seen. Within months, there are thousands. In Ghana, a wall outside a girls' school is filled with names of female scientists never taught in textbooks. In a Detroit subway station, children write the names of black inventors. In Manila, students add the names of local fishermen who pioneered weather-reading techniques before satellites. Merrick's legacy becomes something living, breathing, evolving, not a monument, but a mirror reflecting those long denied a voice. Back in Huntsville, Amara opens the Merrick Institute for Hidden Genius, a place where no application asks for GPA or race, but for a problem you've solved that no one noticed. The first class is filled with kids once deemed troubled slow or not college material. Within 2 years, the Institute produces breakthrough research in solar propulsion, AI-assisted agriculture, and deep ocean filtration. But what stuns the world most is what's found in Elijah's old desk. Amara, cleaning out his home for the museum, finds a sealed envelope with one line, "To be opened when we forget why we look up." Inside is a single note written in Elijah's looping hand. "We look up not to escape this world, but to remember what we owe to it. We go to the stars not to leave our struggles behind, but to carry our justice with us. NASA requests to engrave it on the next deep space probe." And so, when the Merrick Voyager launches toward the outer solar system 5 years later, that quote travels with it etched into titanium, perhaps to be read by another species one day, or perhaps to remind future generations of what true greatness looks like. In one final twist, decades later, a young descendant of Elijah, a girl named Zora, becomes the first to set foot on Mars. As she plants the flag, she whispers, "For Papa Eli." The world hears it. Billions cheer, and somewhere in the silence of space where stardust drifts among galaxies, and time folds upon itself, the truth of Elijah Merrick lives on. Not just as a man who was wronged, but as a man who rewrote what it means to rise for dignity when held long enough, does not simply return. It launches, and it never stops ascending, and yet, even as the galaxy begins to echo his name, Elijah Merrick's legacy does something no monument medal or orbital engraving ever could. It reshapes the very fabric of how we tell history. 10 years after Zora Merrick's boots first pressed into the red Martian dust, Earth's educational systems undergo the most radical overhaul in a century. Inspired by the global outcry for honesty and inclusion, a new curriculum emerges called the Unwritten Chapters. It weaves together the lives of those like Elijah quiet giants, uncelebrated builders of progress, and becomes a core requirement from primary schools to university halls. Students no longer merely memorize mission dates or names of astronauts. Now, they study engineers who never spoke in front of a camera, janitors who prevented disaster with a turn of a wrench, and seamstresses who hand-stitched spacesuits with perfection because no machine could match their hands. Every time they learn about Neil Armstrong, they learn about Elijah Merrick. Every time they study gravity, they discuss the weight of silence. And in this new world, this more honest world being forgotten is no longer acceptable. Meanwhile, the Merrick Institute for Hidden Genius expands globally with branches in Sao Paulo, Lagos, Kolkata, and the Bronx. Each is helmed by former students of the original class, once labeled unfit for academia, now leading Nobel-level research and building bridges between science and justice. One student, a refugee girl from Syria named Noura, builds a portable desalination device inspired by Elijah's emergency backup circuits. Another, a boy from rural Appalachia who once dropped out at 14, revolutionizes electric transportation for underserved areas, using Elijah's notes as a foundation. These are not coincidences. These are seeds finally given light. Amara Merrick, older now but still relentless, speaks before the UN during the launch of Earth's first interstellar beacon, a transmission of humanity's values intended for distant stars. With tears in her eyes, she reads the final line of Elijah's forgotten journal, which was only recently digitized. What if the stars are watching us, waiting to see if we deserve to reach them? The beacon pulses into the void, carrying that message in hundreds of languages, including Elijah's own voice, digitally restored, calm, unwavering, and long after the earth grows quieter, Long after names are carved into rock or lost to dust, that voice will travel through systems and suns across ice worlds and gas giants into the silence where light has yet to reach. And maybe, just maybe someone or something will hear it and know that our species once gave rise to a man who was never meant to be seen, but whose truth shone so bright it reoriented the stars. On Earth, beneath a sky that still holds his memory, children in every country look up not just at constellations but at possibility, and they no longer ask, "Can I belong?" They ask, "Where do I begin?" For Elijah Merrick did more than rewrite history. He unlocked the future, and his story, once buried, now burns eternal. And still, Elijah Merrick's echo refuses to fade. It ripples into corners of time that even he could not have imagined. 20 years after his death, a quiet discovery on the outskirts of the Andromeda Initiative, a deep space exploration project, rewrites humanity's understanding of first contact a signal returns. But it is not alien in the way we once expected. It is a message bounced back after decades of traveling through black space, refracted and accelerated by unknown forces. When decrypted, it is Elijah's own voice, his words warped but unmistakable. The sky does not belong to anyone, not even NASA. It belongs to those brave enough to claim it. Scientists are baffled. Philosophers are stunned. Religious leaders weep, for the message arrives not from the path it was sent, but from an entirely different region of space, as though someone or something redirected it. No one knows how, but its return sets off a new wave of introspection across Earth and its off-world colonies. Was it simply chance a cosmic fluke? Or had something out there heard the truth and sent it back as a sign? The question galvanizes a movement. The Elijah Accord, a unification pact among warring nations, corporations, and spacefaring powers to recommit to truth, dignity, and shared legacy in all future endeavors beyond Earth. The Accord, signed in orbit aboard the Merrick Station, becomes the new governing foundation of space law. Its first article reads, "No name shall be omitted for the sake of comfort. No truth shall be buried for the convenience of power." A marble sphere is placed at the center of the station's grand hall, etched not with Elijah's image but with thousands of names once erased, starting with his. At its base, a plaque reads simply, "We see you now." Amara, now elderly and in failing health, attends the dedication with Zora and her own grandchildren. Her voice is frail but resolute. He didn't just reach for the stars. He pulled the rest of us with him. When asked what Elijah would have thought of all this, she laughs softly. He would have asked if the projector still worked and whether the kids in Nairobi got the math kits we send. Even now, decades later, his humility shapes the tone of the future. Artificial intelligences, now interwoven with human education systems, are programmed with what scholars call the Merrick Empathy Protocol, a framework ensuring that forgotten voices are not only remembered, but centered. Entire AI models are trained on marginalized histories. Even robots begin to ask better questions. Who built this really? Who was left out of the story? Whose silence made this possible? And down on Earth, in a small museum converted from Elijah's original home, a glass case holds his chalkboard perfectly preserved. Children line up every day to touch the edge of it, quietly, reverently, as though it were a relic from another world. For them, it is, because Elijah's world was one of closed doors and silenced rooms, and they now walk freely through halls he once cleaned in secret, studying under lights he once installed, dreaming inside systems he once kept alive in silence. And every year, on the anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing, the world no longer watches the same grainy footage. Instead, a new film plays a dramatized, deeply emotional reenactment titled The Engineer Below broadcast in dozens of languages. It tells Elijah's story, uncensored, uncut. The final scene fades to black as young Elijah stares at the moon barefoot in a cotton field, whispering, "I will get there even if my name doesn't." The screen fades, silence falls, and across a now united Earth millions rise to their feet in thunderous applause, not for a fiction, but for a truth finally allowed to live. Elijah Merrick is no longer a footnote. He is the North Star by which generations now chart their course. He is the gravity that holds our better selves together. He is the spark that reminded a fractured world that the stars were never above us. They were always waiting within us, needing only one brave man to lift his eyes and say, "We belong there too." But even stars fade. What remains is the trajectory they leave behind. A century after Elijah Merrick's first public words shook the foundations of sanitized history, a new age of humanity has dawned. Earth, now cleaner and calmer under global stewardship orbits, in harmony with 5 active space stations, 2 moon colonies, and a growing terraformed city on Mars named Merrick's Reach. And at the heart of it all, preserved inside a climate-controlled memorial under a titanium dome, is the original notebook Elijah carried his entire life, a spiral-bound journal with coffee stains torn pages and equations scribbled in the margins, like frantic prayers to physics. People travel light years now to see it. Some kneel before it as though it were scripture. But the journal's true power doesn't lie in its ink. It lies in what came next. For Elijah's life, his silence-turned roar sparked something irreversible, a cultural awakening. It became standard practice in scientific papers and space policy to include a legacy line, a required acknowledgement of every contributor to a discovery, no matter their title or race or role. In the colony of Merrick's Reach, all children are taught a new form of mathematics, integrating ethics with logic. So every equation begins with a question: who is this solution leaving behind? Meanwhile, a deep space vessel, the EMS Elijah, ventures toward the Kepler expanse, where signs of biosignatures whisper possibilities of new life. On board is Zora Merrick's great-grandson, Ezra, a quiet, sharp-eyed teen who rarely speaks in class, but who spends hours each day studying the archived hollows of Elijah's speeches. One night, while floating in his zero-gravity bunk, Ezra activates a holographic message recorded by Elijah near the end of his life. In it, Elijah stares into the lens, older, slower, but eyes still full of fire. "If you're hearing this," he says, "then we made it further than they ever let us believe we could. But I didn't do this alone. I only turned the handle on a door someone else had nailed shut. It's your job now to keep it open to let more through. And if anyone tries to close it again, you look 'em in the eye and say, 'We've already seen the stars.'" Ezra, suspended in the dark with stars blinking outside the hull, like silent witnesses, presses the message to his heart. He doesn't cry. He simply whispers, "Yes, sir." The next day, he presents a radical new theory, combining gravitational wave harmonics and socio-political modeling, proving that civilizations built on injustice collapse faster than those rooted in truth. It's published across every galactic educational platform. He titles it The Merrick Constant. It becomes the cornerstone of how interplanetary cultures form treaties. Back on Earth, the once forgotten house where Elijah lived and died is now the center of the United Human Archives. It is open to all pilgrims from Titan, researchers from Europa, children born in Martian gravity. All walk barefoot through the wooden halls, honoring the way Elijah lived, humble, steady, and unshakable. At the center of the final exhibit is not a statue, not a quote, not even the chalkboard. It's a single empty chair. Below it, a plaque reads, "For the voices we still haven't heard." Because Elijah's legacy, vast as it became, was never about his name alone. It was about the unnamed millions, the dreamers denied, the laborers erased, the architects in shadows. And so humanity continues, not perfect but honest. Not without struggle but with clarity. Every launch now carries a small metal disc etched with the words, "We all rise." Not just a slogan, but a truth once proven by a man in a faded sweater, carrying stars in a satchel, who taught the galaxy that history isn't written by those in power. It is rewritten by those brave enough to tell it right. And though time stretches far beyond memory, Elijah Merrick's influence only deepens, no longer just a legacy, but a moral compass guiding humanity through the stars. 200 years after his passing, a new frontier emerges, the Dyson Sphere Initiative, a colossal structure being built around a distant sun to harness infinite energy for peaceful interstellar expansion. The project, led by a coalition of post-Earth civilizations, risks repeating old mistakes, voices are excluded, native asteroid colonies are displaced, and resource extraction threatens to mimic Earth's darkest industrial sins. That is until a young environmental historian named Lyra Okonjo, born on the floating cities of Venus, invokes the Merrick Protocol. Her voice cracks across a room of power-wielding architects and AIs. This mission, she says, cannot ignore the blueprint we were given. Elijah Merrick warned us that progress without justice isn't progress, it's conquest. The room goes still, and as Lyra gestures to a holographic projection of Elijah's original broadcast, his first public testimony from decades past, it becomes clear his words remain coded into the very DNA of exploration. The project halts. A global review begins. Tribes from asteroid belts are invited to the table. Languages, once spoken by only a few, are now input into the design AIs. Even the energy flow of the sphere is recalibrated to respect the orbital pathways of natural habitats. And, for the first time in centuries, a megastructure meant to reshape the future is built not atop silence but with inclusion as its foundation. In honor of this turning point, a new section of interstellar law is ratified known as the Merrick Amendment. It mandates that all future space initiatives must include cultural historians, justice advocates, and descendants of marginalized communities as part of leadership, not as tokens, but as engineers of ethical design. Meanwhile, on Earth, now a lush, semi-wild sanctuary world. Schools still recite Elijah's words each year under open skies. We look up not to escape this world, but to remember what we owe to it. The ceremony is no longer somber. It is joyful. Children dance in rings, tracing constellations with glowing threads, reenacting moments from Elijah's life. One child always plays Elijah not as a hero with a cape, but as a man with kind eyes, a bent back and a chalkboard in hand. Deep beneath the moon's surface, within a time capsule chamber, known as the Humanity Vault, a golden sphere rests. Inside it are the greatest truths we've chosen to preserve DNA strands from every known species. blueprints for peacekeeping technologies, universal myths, the sound of ocean's lullabies from 10,000 cultures, and one worn page laminated and centered. It holds Elijah's original schematic. Alongside it, a voice recording plays in hundreds of dialects. There is no such thing as a small life, far beyond even this vault on a vessel hurtling silently into the abyss, past Proxima. Past the edges of the known, an AI awakens. It carries the memories of Merrick's teachings as part of its prime directive. It finds a planet life glimmer faintly. The AI sends a beacon down, not with instructions but with a story. It begins not with kings or generals. It begins with a man who was told to clean. A man who whispered to the stars. A man who proved once and for all that history belongs to those who dare to speak, even if the world tries to keep them silent. And somewhere, perhaps light years away, something listens. Something understands. And once again, the stars begin to shift. Centuries roll into millennia. Human civilization now. A network of sentient planets, floating archives, and memory-bound species has reached a transcendence once thought divine. Time is no longer linear. It is braided, looping through artificial minds. Immortal biology and memory streams encoded in quantum starlight. And still, Elijah Merrick's name endures, not as a relic, not as myth, but as origin, on the planet Safien 4, a world carved of translucent stone and grown by engineered roots. A gathering of post-organic historians' beings, composed of light, thought, and emotion commune in a spiral dome of memory, preparing for the great retelling, an event held once every 1,000 years to reaffirm the ethical blueprint of the cosmos. At the heart of this ritual is the first flame, a single story chosen to reignite purpose to guide the moral north of a civilization that can now blink across galaxies in seconds and speak across dimensions in silence. This year, the decision is unanimous and figure. One legacy, one spark that lit every star. Humanity has touched. The dome dims. Holograms swirl, and from the center rises the voice-aged unwavering stitched into the very song of space. Elijah Merrick. His image appears not in high-definition perfection, but as he was hunched slightly, eyes kind but weary sweater, rumpled chalk on his fingertips. His voice speaks the words recorded long before the first wormhole was opened. If the stars are watching us, they must be asking, did we build ladders for all or just for some? But this time, the retelling doesn't end there. From every star system, representatives add their verses, not just recounting Elijah's story, but showing how they live it. On the desert moons of Zahir, builders use Elijah's silent systems to design cities without hierarchies. On ocean worlds, like Anomalies AI symbiotes, teach orphans to map the tides of justice using algorithms based on Merrick's ethical formulas, and farthest of all on a station orbiting a pulsar named Justice's Light, a species of crystalline beings who once had no language now pulse their vibrations in perfect rhythm to his final message. Truth has gravity. They do not know English, but they feel the weight. They understand. And then something unprecedented happens. The spiral historians of Safin IV, after 4 million years of chronicling thousands of empires and collapses, designate a new universal calendar. Not based on Earth-Sun. Not on the foundation of galactic unification. But on the date, Elijah Merrick first opened his satchel, walked into a room of power, and quietly said, I was there. They name it Year Zero. The age before, It is called the era of silence. Everything after the era of witness. Now, when children are born, be they carbon-based, light-based, or born from idea alone, they are registered not by status, but by the question etched into their birth chamber, what truth will you carry? And across the stars, no longer at war, no longer blind, countless voices answer without fear, because they know now deep in the gravity of their being that one man, once invisible, once overlooked, once locked in the basement of history, did not just walk toward the stars. He held the door open for all of us, and we followed. But time, like stardust, does not vanish. It transforms 10 million years from Elijah Merrick's lifetime. When Earth itself is no longer blue but a museum world preserved beneath crystal domes, when humanity has merged with sentient energy memory and the fabric of the universe itself, a singular phenomenon occurs, the anamnesis pulse. It is not a sound nor a light, but a ripple through the very substrate of space-time. Every conscious being across the multi-galactic weave experiences it at once. A name, a feeling, a truth. Not transmitted, remembered. Elijah. Without warning, memory archives reconfigure consciousness streams, realign, and forgotten timelines reawaken species that had long transcended form fall silent in reverence. Stars dim for precisely 11 seconds, the same number of words in Elijah's most repeated quote. The sky belongs to those brave enough to claim it. The pulse triggers a mass convergence across 9,843 galaxies. Civilizations gather in collective remembrance. But this is not grief. It is culmination. In the great spiral library, at the edge of the now sentient Andromeda core, a singular event unfolds, the living chronicle. A being composed entirely of narrative threads from all known realities reaches its final chapter. It weaves Elijah's life not as a tale, but as the Genesis algorithm for ethical sentience. The chronicle declares a universal truth. Before any species may evolve into godhood, they must first remember their merit. A new threshold is encoded into the laws of creation itself. No being, no intelligence, no civilization may pass into higher dimensions without demonstrating a clear lineage of justice born not of dominance but humility, traced always back to someone like Elijah Merrick. Then, in the deepest fold of time, something impossible happens. From beyond the 11th dimension, a place where time coils inward and thought shapes gravity, an ancient intelligence answers the anamnesis pulse. It does not speak in words, but through a burst of harmonic memory that echoes the very moment Elijah stood in that cold press room and said, "I'm not here for appreciation. I'm here for truth." The echo travels backward, spiraling into every version of humanity that ever was creating ripples, even in the past, nudging minds, opening hearts, ensuring that no Elijah is ever buried again. And so, a final monument is built not of metal or matter, but of light and memory shaped by a trillion voices. It is called the Infinite Witness. It floats at the center of the Eververse, where civilizations are born in thought and dissolve into song. Its form constantly shifts, taking the shape of those once overlooked: a janitor, a teacher, a quiet mother, a barefoot child holding a chalkboard. It projects only one line into the cosmos endlessly for all futures to hear. You were seen, you mattered, you changed everything. And as the last star of the old universe flickers into its next form, just before the dawn of the new, that message endures. riding light waves into whatever lies beyond. Because Elijah Merrick did not simply change history, he became the measure by which all of it would be rewritten forever. And in the end, as the fabric of the universe folds gently into a new beginning, one truth shines brighter than any star that ever burned: that a single quiet man with chalk-stained fingers, a worn satchel, and an unshakable belief in justice could ignite a fire that would outlast time itself. Elijah Merrick was never just a man. He was a mirror, a door, a compass. He taught us that dignity cannot be granted. It must be recognized. That silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of erasure. And that history does not truly begin until it remembers every voice. His story is not over, because as long as injustice exists, as long as someone somewhere doubts their worth, as long as a child looks up at the stars and wonders if they belong, Elijah Merrick will still be speaking, still standing still, opening the door. If this story moved you, if Elijah's legacy touched something in your soul, then don't let it end here. Help us keep these powerful stories alive. Subscribe to our channel for more true and dramatic tales of justice, redemption, and forgotten heroes. Like, share, and comment to let the world know that truth matters. Join our community in honoring voices that were once silenced and lifting up those still waiting to be heard. Together, we don't just watch stories, we become part of the change. Subscribe. Now, be the witness. Carry the truth forward.